It was a big week for education with 18 school bonds and levies on the ballot across 16 school districts around the state. We'll get to those results in a bit, but first on Wednesday, news broke that the University of Idaho has been in talks for months to acquire the University of Phoenix for $550 million. On Thursday, just one day after that news became public, the State Board of Education unanimously approved a request from UI to form a nonprofit that would handle that acquisition. Here to discuss is Kevin Richert of Idaho Education News. Kevin, it's been quite a week.
It really has been, and this news about U of I and University of Phoenix came from out of nowhere, and we're just now starting to come to grips with the enormity of this transaction. I mean, this is a $550 million purchase. It involves $685 million of bonding to cover everything. That is about as much as we're going to spend as a state on the four-year colleges and universities in 2023, 24. It is a staggering amount of money, and it is a process that has unfolded in rapid fire over the past 48 hours.
You touched on this briefly, but this money isn't coming from just cash on hand that the university has. This is from bonds that the nonprofit will acquire.
Right. The separate entity, the nonprofit New U, would be doing the bonding to acquire the project, to acquire University of Phoenix. And the University of Idaho has been careful to say that there's no taxpayer money involved in the bonding. There is some financial risk, though, for the university.
Let's talk a little bit about that financial risk. What does it look like, and how do we get there? What's the path to see that risk?
The path would come if New U was unable to make its payments to cover the purchase of University of Phoenix. At that point, the university would step in to the tune of up to $10 million per year to backstop those payments. Now, that is a fail-safe, and it's not immediately clear to me exactly where within the university's budget that's going to come if that were to come to pass.
There are a lot of things that aren't clear.
There's a lot we're
certainly
still trying to sort out here. Definitely.
One of the questions that I had was, New U, this nonprofit that was the university is forming to handle, they're bonding with state authority.
Correct.
How can it do that and taxpayers not be on the hook?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think there's a lot of governance questions, there's a lot of process questions that we're trying to sort out. And really, what we had on Thursday, the State Board met for 90 minutes before voting unanimously to give the U of I the go-ahead to proceed on this purchase. There were a lot of nitty-gritty questions that were being asked in that meeting, to be fair. But a lot of it was focused on the money flow. How is the University of Idaho going to make money off of this deal? And we really haven't talked about that yet. How would that backstop that $10 million fail-safe kick in? That was really the focus of the meeting. These process questions, these governance questions are still, still questions we need to sort out.
One more question on the governance issue.
Sure.
So the two universities will operate independently. They'll have separate leadership and presidents. But this separate nonprofit entity, New U, it's still connected to the University of Idaho, to be clear. I mean, its address is the Kibbe Dome in Moscow.
Right, and the individual heading the New U board at this point appears to be the counsel for the university. So the connections between New U and U of I are pretty clear.
At Thursday's meeting, one of the board members touched on this, but University of Phoenix doesn't have the best reputation nationally and hasn't for some time. Even if UI isn't financially on the hook for these issues, what's the potential hit to UI's reputation here when it acquires this for-profit entity?
I think that's something that the U of I is really going to have to work on. I think that the messaging and the framing of this merger, let's call it a merger for lack of a better word, that's going to be something that the U of I is going to have to deal with. Now, Scott Green, the president of the U of I, talked about the reputational issues on Thursday, and he acknowledged that University of Phoenix has had problems in the past. He insists that this new team that really wants to go the nonprofit route, really wants to get back to nonprofit education, student-centric service, he thinks that they're wanting to turn the page as much as the U of I wants to partner with an online vendor. So we'll see. But if you watch social media over the past couple of days, everybody has a wisecrack about this merger and about the University of Phoenix. And fair or unfair, that's something the U of I is going to have to combat over the next few months or years.
I think the least negative reaction I saw was, well, that's weird. Most of the reaction that I have seen, and I went to the university, I still have so many friends and connections there, and there was a lot of frustration with how this happened secretly. The University of Phoenix compelled University of Idaho to sign a non-disclosure agreement.
Right.
So these talks have been going on for months, even though we have only known about it for 48 hours.
Right. We had the 3 executive sessions involving the State Board of Education dating back to March, while the university was operating under the NDA. That was a question that came up in the State Board meeting on Thursday. President Green said, look, in order to have a conversation with the University of Phoenix, we had to go the NDA route. But I think that is leaving a lot of people with questions, a lot of people with skepticism. One of those people, by the way, was Representative John Gannon, a Democrat from Boise. He sat in on the meeting. He was sitting next to me during the State Board meeting on Thursday. He didn't comment. There was no public comment, period, during the State Board meeting on Thursday. Afterwards, he wrote a letter to the State Board expressing his concerns about this process, the secrecy, the kind of take it or leave it. We've got to do this week in order to get an application into the University of Phoenix's accreditors by Friday, today, 2 days out from when this became public. His concern is this is secret. It's kind of got a take it or leave it aspect to it. And this isn't the right way to be going about this.
And he isn't the only lawmaker who shared those concerns. I watched the board meeting online. The YouTube channel still had the chat function going, and I saw Representative Mike Kingsley in there, a Republican from Lewiston, who was upset about the same thing, the lack of transparency and the lack of input from lawmakers.
This might be the first time that you're seeing questions about transparency being raised on the same project by the Idaho Statesman's editorial board and the Idaho Freedom Foundation. So if nothing else, the University of Idaho is bringing people together.
You know what? As an alum, I appreciate that. And real quick, before we move on, let's talk about the pluses that President Scott Green was advocating for in this meeting. This has the potential to generate a lot of income for the University of Idaho if it goes well.
Right, and it's still not completely clear to me anyway about how this money all flows. But the way the thing is structured is that the first $10 million of revenue goes straight to the U of I that they can use for strategic initiatives. The university is saying, we think there's going to be a lot more that comes through, that their cash flow is much more favorable than that. So 10 million is really just a starting point. They were talking about upwards of $170 million of revenue for the university by the year 2030. There's a lot of money at stake here. And I think really for the university and for the state board, one of the things that they keep pointing to is we need to come up with an online education system in this state. This is maybe the quickest way to do it because University of Phoenix has that platform already in place. It's been in existence for years.
The state board and University of Idaho were already moving forward with an online platform, Online Idaho, to kind of address some of those concerns, right?
Which the U of I says is still going to be in place. It's still going to be operating as a separate entity, and the U of I's own online classes will continue to operate. So the U of I is really trying to set up a lot of walls here between its operations and the University of Phoenix's operations.
Well, so many questions that we will be looking for answers for over the coming months.
Just getting started here.
President Green, if you want to join us, we would love to have you. So moving on, in other higher education news, this week, tuition freezes at those 4-year higher education institutes in Idaho are no longer. What's going on with that? What do we know?
We know that tuition and fees are going to go up at the 4-year schools by about $400 per year per student. It'll vary a little bit, a few dollars here and there by institutions. This was a 3-year tuition freeze. It was instituted, if you recall, right before the pandemic. So it's really hard to tell how that really worked. It's hard to differentiate what happened with student tuition, what happened to, how did students make decisions about whether or not to go to college? How did the freeze factor and how did the pandemic factor in? At any rate, what we did see over these 3 years was, the dip in enrollment during the pandemic, a rebound almost back to pre-pandemic levels in these 3 years of the freeze. But what you heard on Monday from the state board, and a state board meeting that now feels like happened 3 months ago, board members and university leaders all said, we're reluctant to do this. but we don't see much of a choice because inflation is really hitting the institutions. The cost of pay raises and trying to offset staff turnover, that hits the universities directly because the pay raises instituted by the legislature this year were not fully funded by the legislature. So what you heard on Monday was the board and the universities and colleges saying we have no choice here.
Briefly, we also have new news on North Idaho College and its ongoing saga about the potential for its accreditation to be pulled. What do we know?
We saw a report from the accreditation team that came out on Thursday, and the report said NIC has made some progress. We've seen some improvements in these past few weeks in response to the accreditation concerns. But what you saw in that report was the writer of the report saying it has to sustain. It can't just be a one-off. We've got to see a continued commitment on the college's behalf. Some interesting stuff, though, in that report, too. Quantifying the cost of enrollment declines at North Idaho College, a $500,000 hit this year, another $500,000 hit next year. And interestingly, in the report, two of the trustees said this is not a long-term strategic initiative that the college should be taking on, reversing these enrollment declines that have been going on for a decade that really have a bottom line impact on the college.
Lots going on there for sure. In public schools, K through 12, school bonds and levies, there were a number on the ballot on Tuesday. Do we know, or can you tell us rather, how many of those passed and what kind of effect that's going to have on property tax rolls?
So by and large, it was a pretty good night for public schools across the state. You had 18 measures on the ballot, 16 of them passed. Now, the biggest one of the bunch was West Ada seeking a record $500 million levy for building projects. That failed. Wasn't really all that close. I think they got like 43% of the vote, needed 55%. So for West Ada, district dealing with growth, you're looking at more kids in portables, longer bus commutes for kids, more waitlisting probably for career technical programs. Bonneville also had a bond issue fail narrowly that would have built an elementary school. They're dealing with all the same kind of crowding issues that West Ada is dealing with, but really kind of a mixed bag on these school elections because Valley View in Canyon County, another fast-growing district, they got a bond issue passed. They're going to be building a couple of new elementary schools. And maybe the election that some of us were watching most closely was in Coeur d'Alene. A repeat on a $25 million a year supplemental levy. This will be in place now for 2 years, so $50 million. That district was saying, if this doesn't pass, we're looking at maybe closing schools, we're looking at maybe eliminating extracurriculars, sports, elective courses. Voters responded. That passed really comfortably. It got almost 65% of the vote.
Roughly how many of these were repeat asks for the voters?
So as I calculated it and wrote about it this week, there were 6 districts that had what you could call repeats. They're versions of a proposal or variations on a proposal that had failed going back to August. Valley View is a good example. They had a bond issue that failed in August. This one was actually a bigger ask, and it passed narrowly, but it passed. Idaho Falls had a huge bond issue on the ballot in November. They were looking for $250 million. They came back this time around much smaller. It was a levy. It was $33 million. It was a really smaller, much smaller version of what West Ada was trying to do with a levy for school buildings. It passed. So they've got the green light to build a school that they need to deal with growth on the outskirts of town. I
know that a lot of the online chatter I saw in the West Ada district community, the voters who were eligible to vote on that, a lot of people were skeptical about the size of the ask. As you said, that's a lot of money, yeah. And also what it would be used for, because it wasn't just school facilities. It was subsidized childcare for school employees and things along that line that raised some eyebrows, I know, with voters. And I think that what you will maybe see in the future with West Ada, we don't really know what West Ada's next move is going to be, but based on what we saw on Tuesday with these repeat bond and levies passing, there's a more than decent chance that West Ada and Bonneville will be back with different proposals, maybe smaller proposals, maybe fine-tuned in one manner or another. And I know that raises the ire of lawmakers who want to curb these elections, but at this point, this is kind of how the process works. Districts going back and forth sometimes with their patrons and saying, well, okay, that was too much. What if we came back with this? Idaho Falls serves as a really good example.
$250 million was clearly too much for patrons to stomach in November. $33 million, a lot different story.
And to be specific, that's raised the ire of lawmakers who have responded with bills to say that you can't run a repeat levy or bond ask within, say, 12 months or 18 months. It's depended on the proposal. None of them have been successful.
3 have passed the House in recent years, and they would have limited bond issues, not levies, but bond issues, requiring districts to wait 11 months, which effectively means you're waiting a year before you run another bond issue. Had that bill been had it become law, had it been on the books, Valley View would have had to wait until August to rerun its bond issue. I don't know if that makes a whole lot of difference in Valley View, but I think what it suggests to you, though, is that lawmakers are really skeptical of this whole school election process. This is a legislature that eliminated the March school election date entirely this session. It'll be really interesting to see what sort of restrictions the legislature comes back with and tries to pursue in 2024. I know we'll see something. We just don't know what it'll look like.
So much to get to. We have about 90 seconds left. I'd love an update on the Empowering Parents Grant Program.
A couple things I'm watching for here. The program is on hold somewhat. The State Board is reviewing purchases made on this platform. And just to refresh, this is the platform that allows parents to get money for microgrants to cover a computer or counseling or tutoring. State Board of Education is saying that some of that money may have gone towards items that are not authorized purchases, smartwatches, TVs, clothes. So they're doing a review. And at the same time, we're expecting the formation of a parent advisory committee to take a look at how this program should go forward. Because remember, now we're talking about a permanent program. We're going from a $50 million one-time federally funded grant program to $30 million of state funding, with the idea of this being a permanent program. So a lot to watch
annually,
for.
Right.
Yes, $30 million a year. So a lot
annually
to watch for on that.
All right. Anything else you're watching for in the next few weeks as we hit the summer months and schools are wrapping up for the season?
I think our hands are full.
Just a bit.
Just a little.
Just a little bit. All right. Kevin Richert, Idaho Education News. Thank you so much for joining us.